Okay, so welcome everyone to today's webinar, Leveraging Low and No-Cost Tech Tools to Boost CLC Effectiveness. My name's Carly Hanson. I'm from Community Legal Centres Queensland, and firstly I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding this webinar. So in Brisbane, they are the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I wish to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the very important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. So as this webinar is being viewed by people throughout Queensland and Australia, and our presenter is also not in Queensland, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and welcome any First Australians listening in today. So today's session is going to be presented by Skye Forster, Director of Operations at the Consumer Action Law Centre. So Skye's going to talk to us about how Consumer Action transformed their somewhat clunky internal processes and siloed teams into a fantastic, collaborative and efficient workplace using the technology available to them free of charge or at a very low cost, together with a whole pile of consultation, which is very key to this process. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, finding the time and money to invest in IT can be really challenging for community legal centres, but it is so important given the roles that our systems and particularly our data play in terms of meeting funder requirements, providing effective services and promoting systemic change. So today's webinar is going to be recorded, and we'll pop the recording up online later this afternoon. The PowerPoint handouts have been emailed to everyone who registered yesterday afternoon, and you can also grab them from the handout section on the GoToWebinar control panel. We're going to also run 2 polls today, so please pop your answers on the poll questions when they come up on the screen. So that'll be at the start of the presentation, and that's going to really help Skye know where everyone is at. So I might just launch the first poll now while I keep talking, so you have some time to pop your answers in. So as per usual, we'll probably hold the questions over to the end. So there are 2 ways you can ask questions. You can press the button that looks like a hand, so you already are aware of how to do that, and we can unmute you so you can use your microphone to ask your question. Or probably the easier way, you can type your question into the question box on the control panel, and we'll read those questions out for Skye to then answer for you. That's probably almost everything from me, and I can see the poll questions coming in, which is awesome. So I might just hand over now to Skye to introduce herself, and then we'll close the poll and we can discuss the results and run the second poll. So thanks everyone, and thank you, Skye. All over to you.
Hi everyone. A little bit about us at Consumer Action Law Centre. We're a specialist centre in Melbourne. We service all of Victoria with telephone advice lines for both financial counselling and legal advice. And we also have a policy and campaigns team who draw on that advice and casework to inform their program of advocating for law and business practice reform. And that's to benefit all Australians, not just Victorians. We have almost 50 staff now and usually host up to about 4 volunteers each week. So we're reasonably large as far as CLCs go. It's not necessarily where we were when I started, and also this session will be fairly rapid fire. I can see that most people are in the intermediate range with a few advanced and a few newbies, so I'll try and make sure that it hits all of those audiences as much as possible. Due to the webinar format, as mentioned, we'll take most of the questions at the end, although I have sort of put one chunk in after the first sort of section as well. So I'll let you know when that is. And if we simply can't get to all of them during the session, I'll be sure to address them afterward via email to all participants. So don't worry if your burning question didn't get answered. Keep in mind, we'll also send the handout notes. So don't feel you need to write every single thing down. And looking at that second polling question, we've got a real mix across the struggling, functional and operating well. And the good news is no matter where you sit on the continuum, there's always more to learn. So we may as well get started. Basically, the way I think about, leadership in technology in an organisation such as this is that it's a journey. Improving it is always a journey. It takes you on the winding road through the dizzying heights of shiny object syndrome to the depths of outright mutiny, on various wild goose chases and the harsh terrain of change management, beyond, hopefully, to a better and happier and more effective workplace. Some legs of the journey will be fast, others may take years. Maintaining a positive outlook and an adventurous nature is pretty key. So where did we start? Well, about 8 years ago, when I started with Consumer Action, I inherited a heavily band-aided infrastructure. We had a server that crashed almost daily, taking us offline for at least 20 to 30 minutes at a time, a staff who were wholly disengaged with and unempowered by technology. We had a mishmash of platforms and applications used differently or not at all by each team, and a support team that were conspicuously absent and notoriously difficult to get a rapid response from. We really needed help. So the first step was to find a co-pilot and build a team. I had to admit that I was out of my depth. There were so many complex and interrelated problems that I needed help sorting them out. For some organisations, you may already have resources existing, but you might need to make the case for them to get allocated to you. For others, external support might be required because it's just not something that's readily available internally. For us, it was the need to find an external IT support provider willing and able to take on that day-to-day firefighting, but also to help me craft a longer-term strategy to haul us out of the quagmire and, hopefully impart their knowledge where possible to those willing to learn, so we could manage those lower-level issues ourselves and not be constantly calling an external provider. To develop any long-term plan, I needed to understand what the needs of our various teams were, both immediate and horizon. So, often we're dealing with the urgent and not the important, which isn't just siloed to technology. That kind of goes across the board. So our approach was to set up an IT team with representatives from each of the departments in the organisation so we could ensure that all issues were addressed and prioritised in a fair and logical way. The team members weren't especially skilled in IT, but the people that put up their hands were interested in how it could improve how they worked. They were instructed to keep the lines of communication open with their departments and bring any sort of issues that were raised to the table so that we could ensure all those concerns were heard and considered and responded to, but also identify whether something was just an issue for that team or perhaps the centre as a whole, because obviously the way that you approach managing change in that respect can vary. So when developing a strategy, be sure to focus on the longer term. You can use the theory of change model if your organisation finds it helpful, but whatever you do, decide where you need to go before you start thinking about which tools might help, because it's easy to get stuck in that trap of hearing about a great tool and going, that would be awesome, but you might not have actually really delved into the underlying, reasons for the problem. You might be fighting symptoms and not the underlying disease. There's no point in thinking about tools before you know what your overarching strategy looks like, because that way leads straight to shiny object syndrome, and you'll end up with a bunch of flashy looking tools that aren't necessarily right for the job and no one really likes. And then, of course, why change? We all have habits that are hard to break, and it's especially true of workplaces, and we all have members of our teams that vary in their ability to cope with change, especially in the really, crazy busy world of CLC land where we're massively under-resourced and cannot possibly meet the demand of our services. Often we do the same things the same way for years and years that are kind of silly and without ever questioning it, and whether there's a smarter way to do it or it needs to be broken into different pieces. Sometimes the solution is quite low tech, and in other cases it's a blow it up situation because it's something that is so fundamentally wrong. It's really causing dramas for everyone. An example of a low-tech one we had recently was a real bugbear for pretty much everyone in the organisation was anytime a debit card had to be used, there was this clunky cover sheet that had to be filled out and with a bunch of fields and this, that and the other, purportedly to meet the auditor's requirements for accounting rules. but everyone got so sick of it, we eventually did come around to the idea. I don't know why it took me 8 years, but there you go. Sometimes I'm a bit slow on the uptake as well. That actually we didn't need to be printing out all these extra pieces of paper. We just needed to go and get a stamp made that had the basic fields on it, and all the fields weren't required. Just had the basic fields so people can stamp their receipt, write in the things, get it signed off, and that's that. So, you know, we're saving a few branches this year, hopefully. That was very low tech, simple to implement, high satisfaction win, you know, plenty of happy campers. An alternative project we have on at the moment is a complete change to our client management system. And many of you will be enduring the throes of the transition to Class. We decided not to go with Class. We'd like to, but being a high volume telephone advice service where time is of the essence, it's simply not going to work for us. So the existing CMS that we use, it just doesn't meet our practice needs really anymore. There are better options out there, but it requires significant investment and change management. There's going to be lots of teething issues and plenty of immediate pain with the we're not really experienced until a year or two later. So this kind of project isn't something that you enter into lightly. I bet everyone in this session can think of something that drives everyone in your office nuts, but you all do it anyway. Maybe take a moment, make a note of that one thing, and then after this session, spend some time thinking about how it could work better, and perhaps whether any of the tools that I'm going to talk about could potentially help you do that. Whatever you do, it's worth following some standard change management processes to ensure you bring people with you as well. If you need a refresher on change management, I'll send you a list of online options, but there's a really quick one through allison.com. It's a free online course. It takes about 2 to 3 hours, but it's online, so you can break it into as many chunks as you need to. And there's plenty of paid courses via face-to-face training organisations wherever people are, but it's worth getting a good understanding of general change management processes and trying to follow that because they do work. In fact, we just ran a session in preparation for our CMS changes that are coming up in the next 12 months, and we chose some influencers from each team and some people that are traditional immediate answer is no to everything type people, and got them in a room and just went through the real basics of like, why do we change things, and you know, how do you think that we communicate the change and things like that. And what came out of that was really interesting. It was an overarching request for us to always follow all the steps of a change management process, and key being involving everyone in the problem identification phase. So for what that's worth. And another tip would be in relation to resourcing, because none of us have enough money and resources. Get to know the donation and discount schemes available in your area. Be aware of grant programs that might support capital expenditure on infrastructure or lower cost tech investment. They're few and far between, but they do pop up, so it's worth trying to keep your eyes open there. In Australia, Connecting Up are one of the main tech suppliers and trainers to the not-for-profit sector. All CLCs should be eligible for their discounts and donations program. So if you haven't heard of them, write that down and go look at their website, connectingup.org.au. It covers both software and hardware. And there's also networking supplies. I mean, there's all sorts of things available through them. They also offer all sorts of training you might find helpful. TechSoup are the New Zealand equivalent, and sometimes their training webinars might work for you as well because, you know, time zones fairly similar. Microsoft have a donation program for the not-for-profit sector, which is quite generous. I imagine most people are using their volume licensing for Office products, but if not, definitely have a look at those. And not only can the Office 365 cloud suite be provided for absolute free, but there's also $5,000 annual credit available for the Azure project if you need more complex cloud offerings. They offer heavy discounts on Dynamics 365, which can be used to build up workflows and you know, more like practice management software. Power BI cloud product comes in a free and a heavily discounted version for us as well. There's also volume discounts available on most of their other products. So, server software, operating system software, that kind of thing. Google's G Suite is another free option. Many other suppliers offer discounted pricing for not-for-profits, but they don't advertise. So I've made it a practice to, whenever I'm looking at buying something new, just asking, being cheeky. You don't get if you don't ask. So I always just check out whether they have provision for not-for-profit pricing, or would they offer us a one-off discount, especially if it's a larger chunk. It might be you have to pay the normal maintenance fee over a year, but you can get a really big discount on implementation costs or something like that. So keep your eyes and ears open. If you see an email from a colleague or a stakeholder organisation offering up free iPads or something else you can use, put your hand up, quick sticks. We were lucky enough to get 5 units. One of our funders was offloading, so staff can use them for outreach and things like that. Would have been really difficult before. We didn't have that much of a budget for that sort of ancillary type tech. And don't be afraid to ask as well. If you have a good relationship with a pro bono partner or perhaps an industry organisation that you're doing work with, they might just be getting rid of something, or they might have a renewal program that means they get rid of their computers every 2 years or something. Generally, I'm purchasing refurb computers and they last for about 4 years. So, we even scored some fancy filing cupboards when we were moving offices, which there is no way we could have afforded on our own. And that was just because we happened to be moving office. One of our directors was talking to someone they knew at another industry organisation on a work group they were on. They were moving offices as well, and it just came up, oh, do you need stuff? Because I think they're trying to get rid of these things. So if you make sure your whole team is aware of the wish list, then if they hear about opportunities, they let you know. So at this point, I'm probably happy to take some questions around any issues you might have in identifying problems, or just how to develop a general strategy, any change management or resourcing questions.
So everyone, just a reminder that you can type your questions into the question box if you have something that you'd like to ask Guy in relation to this topic. So feel free to put them in at any time. Otherwise, we might come back to you at the end if you're having a think about what you'd like to find out. So, Sky, I've got a question that's come through from Janelle. She's just asking generally about storage of files in smaller centres. So I'm not sure whether that means sort of within the centre or off-site storage. So they're obviously things that can cost money and have an impact on, available space, which is often limited in CLCs, as you're probably aware. Yeah. So
within the centre.
Yeah.
Yep. And I guess second question, I'll assume this is electronic files, but I'm not 100% sure. So if we're talking about paper files, there's probably 2 ways we can go. I inherited a bunch of paper files. We've gone through a transition to moving to all electronic files here. Okay, paper files. Well, the first thing we did was identify the ones that were easy to convert. So, not your 5-folder long litigation briefs and things like that, but if it's a paper file that consists of essentially 1 or 2 manila folders of file notes and that sort of thing, we first changed our retainer letter, and I'm happy to share the clause that relates to this with people if it would be helpful. We changed our retainer letter for clients so that it mentioned up front that their files were going to be converted to be electronic, and that at the end of when their file was closed, they would have 65 days to tell us whether they wanted us to retain their paper file as well. Otherwise, it would be destroyed securely, of course, and their electronic file would be held on file for 7 years or longer. I think it says, I think there's a disclaimer there. Once we had done that, then we changed the practice so that when the file is closed, it gets scanned in and stored correctly. Now, keep in mind, that does drive up your electronic storing requirements, but that's getting easier and easier. We currently use just and this is something where we're going to move to a different CMS. So someone's asked that question about what type of software we use for storing legal documents and generating letters. We have a bit of it, still a little bit higgledy-piggledy. It's actually been the last cab off the rank of our sort of 5-year strategy to actually move to something like that. So at the moment, we have our client management system has client data in it and file notes for just the day-to-day sort of admin stuff and some important things for reporting. But any correspondence with the client, emails, formal letters for court, things like that, are held in a paper file, and then when the file is closed, they are scanned in, and there's a standard structure we have for our electronic files so that you always know where you can go and find whatever you need to. Moving forward, we are looking at we actually have a request for product out at the moment to the sector, and we're looking for a client management system that we can afford, but that very much has the document generation and storage capacity. So there are often comparisons, I guess, between the different options for storage, and the key for you guys is going to be that it's domiciled in Australia. So anything that's stored in the cloud, just make sure that there's no cross-border data flows. I think I need to probably get a move on, but I'll come back to some of these questions further at the end. So the big comparison usually is between G Suite, formerly Google Apps, and Office 365. Both have comprehensive offerings. However, I focus predominantly on Office 365 because as a legal practice, having that data domiciled in Australia is critical, and they're extremely responsive to Office 365 service requests. Other NFPs might be able to deploy G Suite safely, but for us, the data storage is critical. So having those data centers in Victoria and New South Wales providing redundancy and security is key. It is important to acknowledge the difference, however, between Office Online applications and Office Desktop Client applications up front. The online applications have more limited functionality. So a really common example that's critical to most of our team is that they love track changes. If the file is stored in 365 and they're using it in, say, Word Online, if track changes is on, it will tell you. It just won't show you those changes in track as you go. You'd need to open it in the desktop application. Calculations in Excel might need to be manually triggered, and cross-sheet linking is tricky. So the collaboration options are significantly greater than in the desktop, but it's just important to be aware of those little differences. There are a couple of ways you can deploy Office 365. So you can pay for it or you can get it for free and then use a much cheaper volume license for the desktop client applications and have a sort of a hybrid. So with a paid Office 365 license, you get both the online and the desktop applications. And the beauty with that is that you can actually install it on up to 5 devices for each user. So if that person also works a lot remotely or on their phone or from home, then they can have it on those computers and mobile devices. With the hybrid option, the Office 365 suite of online applications integrates really well with Office 2016, quite well with Office 2013, to a more limited way with 2010. So really, if it's something that's feasible, I'd recommend upgrading to Office 2016 via a volume license, which is pretty cost effective. There's also E1 versus E3 licenses when you go and look at the different non-profit options. I'll send you a link to that page as well. It's pretty sort of easy to have a look. So that's free versus $7 a month, but another option that's quite good is the non-profit business premium. It's a pretty good compromise at close to $4 a month per user. So that's better for small to mid-sized organizations. Most people are quite familiar with Outlook, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and less so with OneNote, but it's basically a note-taking application on steroids. Now, I have a video of our Director of Legal Practice talking about this. So we're going to give it a go and see if it works, but if it doesn't work well, that's fine. We'll just skip it and I'll explain what she was going to talk about. So bear with me here. Okay, so if anyone really struggled with that, please let us know, because I'll skip the next couple. So moving forward, this is an example of OneNote, just so that people can visualize it. On the left, you can see a notebook that was just a simple one-pager, just with some text. That was something that another lawyer and I were sharing because we were doing some training when we introduced SharePoint Online and OneDrive for the team. And on the right is more of a brain dump, I guess, for me, of some ways that I could help the team here understand some of the changes we were making and why we were making them. So just, kind of a little bit of fun for myself. Moving on to admin tools. So this is where we get to the rapid fire bit. I'm going to throw out a whole bunch of things that might be useful for different things and different sized organizations who are facing different challenges. So there's all kinds of admin tools available. Some of my favorites are Expensify. It's great for people on the go that are managing expense reimbursements. I'm not sure if any of you have, sort of more discrete small programs that are kind of quite self-sufficient and they need to just be on the go and be sending stuff back to the office while they're on the go. That's a good one. If this then that is great for setting up some workflows that could be as basic as one I've got is when any of our email addresses show up on a "you've been pawned" list, that I get an email telling me. But they can also be much more complex. Trello is kind of like a planning application. In personal life, I've used it quite well to track some renovations and things we were doing. But from a business perspective, you would basically set up what they call buckets for each list, each sort of part of a project. So you might have a project broken up into separate parts that different people are responsible for. Within each bucket, you can have multiple tasks and allocate them to different people and set deadlines and things like that. Microsoft Planner is the free, as part of Office 365, is an application that they're developing pretty much to mirror that type of functionality, and it's rapidly gaining ground, so worth having a look at both of those if you're looking for something along those lines. Wave Apps is fantastic. It's a free application for invoicing, expenses, customer lists, things like that. So again, if you've got some of those discrete projects running and you want to kind of silo their function from the rest of the operations, that can be a really great option. And Rike is another project management type application. Interestingly, Employment Hero use Rike in their implementation phase with their customers. So it's got some quite high level functionality and, you know, for free. That's a pretty good win. You know, the phrase "there's an app for that" applies to almost anything. So have a listen to what your team are complaining about and then search for a solution. If nothing obvious comes to mind, maybe reach out to colleague organisations to find out if they've ever had to deal with this problem. You know, I have a couple of lovely operations people in other organisations that we essentially have the red phone to each other, and when we come against something tricky, we'll give each other a bell and see if together we can work it out. Another one is just sort of like a random site for nonprofits to get bulk donations or discounts, is good360.org.au. Might be worth having a look. There's a fee to join, but I've heard good reports about the variety of goods available to support events, emergency supplies, things like that. So it might be worth, some of your organisations might be doing things that need t-shirts or hats or baby blankets, whatever it might be. It's worth perhaps having a look at that. Moving on to the collaborative tools that Office 365 offers. So you've got OneDrive, which is essentially a replacement for your C drive or your personal file folder, except it has the ability where you can control access to those documents. So you can have documents that only you have access to. Maybe it's just, you know, the stuff that's your day-to-day kinds of things. But then there might be documents that you're collaborating on with other people and you both want to work on the document at the same time. That can be done really simply within OneDrive, whether it's a Word document or an Excel or perhaps a PowerPoint. SharePoint is kind of like, I guess, at its simplest, it can just be a replacement for a shared folder structure. At its most complex, it can be a fully realized staff, intranet, and practice management software, and anything in between. It's basically where you create a space or a group of spaces for teams to work together, both in the office and remotely. The level of complexity is really down to what best suits your team and business practice. It is worth getting some help building that if it's something that you're considering, and I'm happy to share a whole bunch of resources that I have on that if that's something that people are interested in. Yammer is basically a series of news feeds sort of built according to team or topic. It's entirely up to you how it's deployed and can be built in a way that best serves your organisation. So we found that one of the most useful for us was the tech support channel. By setting up a channel that was dedicated to tech support, rather than having people drop by my office every 5 seconds, they could submit their query. I have some guidance as to how it would be helpful to submit a query rather than just say, my computer's not working. So, you know, adding a screenshot, answering a series of questions, how to replicate the problem, things like that. And what's happened as a result of that is we've organically grown this tech support resource that people can search themselves for their own solutions. And then if it's really beyond that, then they post their problem. And we've found that they're what we call accidental techies throughout the organisation that are quite good at resolving problems when I'm not as quick on the draw as they'd like. Delve is a tool that can be used both as an individual workflow manager and an internal directory. You can see what you were working on most recently, what your colleagues are working on, and you can set it up as a, you know, have your organizational structure in there so newbies know who to go to for what, things like that. I guess I'd say making the shift from Windows File Explorer and folders within folders within folders isn't easy, but it is entirely worthwhile. So my advice is probably to allocate an appropriate amount of time to not only consult with individuals and teams, but also to allocate the resources to train and retrain and then review and revise how best you use any of these tools within your organisation. So this is an example of what Yammer looks like. On the left is basically if you go to look at what groups are available for you to follow their threads in Yammer, you've got a list on the left-hand side there and then also sort of the little icons of them. And on the right is an example of that calc support, tech support channel, and just some examples of how people submit things and use it. And I don't think I had too many screams of no, that video didn't work. So what I might do now is go to the other video that I had.
Sorry, Sky, I'll just interrupt. We didn't get any sound on the last video at all.
Oh.
So I'm not sure whether that's because you've dialed in on the phone or whether the bandwidth just isn't cooperating with us today. So it might be best for you to talk through the video.
Okay, I'll just explain a really good example. Sure. So I was going to have Shungi Patsika, one of our senior financial counsellors, talk about how his team use Yammer. So there's a couple of ways they use it. They use it to share client stories within the group so that they can kind of get a sense of emerging issues and things like that that will then feed into our policy work. But also, he had a situation one day where he was talking to a client, and the problem that they'd run into really was caused by some incorrect information about how to access financial counselling on a bank website. And so he was sort of, I guess, venting his frustration about this, but also in a way that explains why that's a bad outcome for the client. And it just so happened that one of our policy officers saw his post, was headed to an industry meeting with some bank leaders that day, and was able to raise that issue with them, and it eventuated in a pretty simple fix to some text on their website that resolved the problem. So it's things like that which that might not normally have been picked up by the policy team, because it would have just been someone having a bit of a rant to the person sitting next to them. But by using that tool of Yammer to elevate those sort of maybe not absolutely critical but quite important issues, because the cumulative effect can be quite impactful, then getting a solution to it so quickly was really satisfying. So there's a whole host of free creative and social media tools. This is just a short list of some of the ones that we use and find effective. So Buffer's a great collaborative tool for managing social media. Canva is excellent for graphic design. The free version is really intuitive and user-friendly. It has a modest paid model as well. So if you have multiple users, depending on, some organisations have quite a large communications team. Obviously, the use of social media and communicating our stories and the stories of the people we help is more and more important, not just to pitch for more funding and things like that, but to help the community understand what it is we do and why we do it. And so these are some tools that can help us achieve that. Pixabay is good, and Unsplash. They're both good resources for Creative Commons or royalty-free images that you can then use in Canva when putting your stuff together. Bitly is just a tool for shortening rather long URLs, because sometimes that's helpful in newsletters and things like that. Adobe Creative Cloud, I've put this on here. It's not free, but you can get it heavily discounted via connecting up. And if you do a lot of in-house publishing, it might be worth it for your comms team, particularly if they're people that have come with skills in InDesign and things like that anyway. It's relatively cost-effective rather than outsourcing that sort of stuff. And internally, we use OBS Studio, which is Open Broadcasting Software, I think is what OBS stands for, and YouTube using their private channel in concert to run our own webinars, which we find really quite simple and easy. And so that way, if you can't afford GoToWebinar or any of those other types of options, of which there are plenty, and they're very well set up, and they've got lots and lots of bells and whistles. But if you really are strapped for cash, OBS Studio and YouTube Private Broadcast could be a good combo for you. Hootsuite is another way, similar to Buffer, to monitor and manage your various multimedia platforms. There's a free version to start out, but if you sort of want that more deep analytics or separate users, you need one of their paid plans. Then education and training. So you're at a webinar. Well, I'm doing a webinar. There are lots of paid education options for just different skills. I find especially technical skills, especially if you're making changes to the technology programs that you're asking your workers to use. Linda and Alison and Treehouse have some quite good stuff that can be fairly quick and easy for people to access when they want to. Microsoft Training Center is also very good, and you know, between that and YouTube, there were sort of squillions of videos of people showing you how to do stuff on the computer. So oftentimes it's just about looking up, you know, whatever it is, tutorial. Google's a pretty good friend. With webinar services, you've got AnyMeeting and GoToMeeting, and for free there's Skype Meeting Broadcast. You can also use Facebook Live. We've dabbled with that a few times. There's authoring software, e-learning software. So some offer a per user or monthly plans that might suit modest needs. A lot of the fully functional ones are probably on perpetual licenses. They tend to come in around $1,500 from what I could tell. H5P offer a basic e-learning suite for free. And Articulate is one that offers a range of plans and modules that might work, but it's not the only one. I'll also include in my notes a list of free tools that are available for e-learning stuff. And for some of our staff who perhaps have come from private sector, where they maybe had people do a lot of their admin and data entry and things like that, who need to improve their typing, because our model is, as the caseworkers are on the phone, they're taking their own notes and setting up their own files and doing all that sort of thing themselves. The typing test and tutor at ratatype.com is pretty excellent. Then you've got engagement and fundraising. So, you know, MailChimp, Eventbrite, Do Gooder, GoFundMe. There's a whole host of other things. These are just sort of the ones that I thought of. So Eventbrite or Try Booking for managing registrations for events. There are paid or free tickets. There are some minimal fees for paid events. Do Gooder is a monthly fee, but it's for campaign engagement. So it enables the type of engagement where participants can quickly add their name to a form letter, and by inputting their postcode, have it sent to the relevant organisation or politician, or that sort of thing. So it's similar to sort of your change.org type stuff. The cost varies depending on how many campaigns you want to run, but just over $1,000 annually gets you 5 concurrent campaigns and the ability to fundraise. So it might be a good option for some of you. GoFundMe is a fundraising tool with very few restrictions. They do take a small percentage of each contribution made though. Other options are DonorBox, CVCRM, Donor Manager, and Process Donation. MailChimp is a really simple way to send newsletters or other bulk email. It's free until you have more than about 2,000 subscribers, I think, currently. And then it ranges for about $10 a month on up. I think it's roughly $5 per 200 additional subscribers. So, yeah, something to think about. Then moving on to Office 365's bells and whistles, because they keep adding things. The Office 365, well, Microsoft Office's roadmap currently has 365 and 2016 moving virtually in parallel, but it's quite clear from the work they're doing that their focus is very much on the online offering. And that's coming through really heavily with a whole host of different applications that do different things. So I mentioned Planner earlier, in that it's similar to Trello, and it's a way to manage ongoing projects. Flow is a way to create workflows, can be used in combination with forms, which is just what it sounds. You make up forms for people to fill out, and Power Apps, which Power Apps does cost extra, but it might be something that if you're looking for ways to automate things, the combination of those applications might work really well for you. Teams is like Slack, and it has a whole host of add-ins. It's essentially an instant messaging app that also allows you to create workspaces around a conversation. And so you might be having a conversation with 2 or 3 people in a sort of an instant chat message window, but you've got the ability to add files for each of you to be able to edit those files. You might be able to add a poll or survey application. You can add a OneNote notebook to a conversation, all those sorts of things. It's actually really quite powerful. And something that we've invested a lot of time, and it just sort of seems to be growing organically. To do is what it sounds like, to-do list. Sway is kind of a simple, how to describe it simply? It's just a fancier version of PowerPoint, where you can create a bit more animation and have it, I guess, seem a bit more like an advertisement or something like that. So it could be used really effectively to tell customer stories and things like that, or even people you work with, their stories, or the story of a project if you're trying to get a funder to understand exactly what the outcome was. Power BI is data analytics. It's only free for the desktop version, but I've found that actually works just fine. But if you really want the depth and integration, the online version might work better in combination with Dynamics 365 if you're going to look at that sort of thing. And keep in mind too, there's always the Microsoft Office store. There's a growing number of third-party add-ins available. Some obvious useful examples might be DocuSign for Word, or they have employee onboarding apps and scheduling, things like that. So this is what Microsoft Teams looks like when you open it up. On the left-hand side here, you've got, you can be in the chat window, you can be in your Teams window, and so you can have a bunch of different teams that do different things. You can also see your meetings for the day and any files that you've been engaged with in your different Teams chats. And on the right is, so that's on the left is the Teams window, and on the right is my individual chats with a bunch of different people. Again, I was going to have Denise Boyd talk about her experience with Teams and how it helped her. So I'll just give you a brief explanation. Basically, we had a interstate delegation in Canberra lobbying on a particular issue about a year ago, and they needed to they had back-to-back meetings with ministers and ministers' advisors. They had case studies they were trying to bring to the fore. It was actually a combination of lawyers and financial counsellors from New South Wales, Canberra, and Victoria, along with some of our clients. And so as they were going, they would get questions back, or perhaps in the first couple of meetings hit a few snags. They were really easily able, using Teams, to be able to flick a question back to the team in the office here, who were then able to quickly trick something up, whether it be provide more data or a nice table, or upload a case study video, something along those lines, so that they could then use it in their subsequent meetings. And yeah, Denise just said it absolutely transformed the way she thought about how they could do these this sort of lobbying activity in the future. The other great thing about Teams that I think has driven uptake is that you can do memes and GIFs within the app. So down at the bottom on those two pages, you can see there's, you can do text formatting, you can attach something, you can do emojis, but there's also the ability to do a GIF or make a meme like that. So you just got a bit of fun for your teams, and it's always nice to add something like that in, especially when there's a new tool that you're trying to get people used to. Moving on to data analytics, some of you might have the need for this. Power BI, as mentioned, the desktop is free, and the cloud version costs some money. But when Google Analytics isn't really cutting it, and you don't want to spend hours building pretty stuff in Excel, there's a growing tribe of these types of things that can help. And a lot of the free stuff can get you most of the way there. So Tableau have a public free version and a private paid version, but that can be really helpful. And there's lots and lots of demo videos to sort of figure out what it can and can't do. Kibana is an open source option. The technology itself is free, but you'll need to pay a developer most likely in order to build it. But we've had some real success in, as I mentioned, our CMS really isn't up to the task of what we need it to do. So what we did is invest a modest amount of money with some developers that we came across to have them build us a Kibana interface that just using an API talks to our CMS, and we can crunch and massage our data in far more powerful ways through Kibana than we could before. We can now do things like heat maps and geolocation, or looks for things in a particular electorate if we're going to meet with that minister, things like that. So that's quite useful. And I just popped tree size free on there because it's really helpful if you're trying to figure out where the bloat is on your network. If you think that you keep running out of space and someone's a bit of a file or whatever hoarder, this can help you identify where that bloat is. There's also, it's increasingly important, phishing and malware prevention. So there's a bunch of testing tools that you can use. You've got a whole host of password apps, and I'll actually, in the notes, I'll make sure I list a whole bunch of them, but that might be helpful if you've got a series of applications and everyone has to have different passwords and it's driving them all crazy. Malwarebytes, the free version, is fine. I ask my team to run it every month on their computers. It frequently picks something up. We have been the victim of 2 ransomware attacks. The first one was about 3 years ago now, and we were able to restore 98% of our shadow copy, but because of bad behavior and habits by staff just using folders within folders within folders within folders, we weren't able to restore the final 2% because the file path was too long. It was more than 256 characters, which is the limit for Microsoft. And that was really unfortunate because that, of course, then meant we had to pay the ransom and we became a target. And so then last year there was another ransomware attack. This time we'd learned our lesson. Some of the changes we'd made by bringing everything as much as possible onto Office 365 totally saved our bacon. Microsoft were able to restore all of our content and everything that people had been working on to within half an hour of the ransomware infiltrating the system. And we didn't have to pay the ransom, and we got all of our data back. It was actually truly amazing. Having had the previous experience, the difference was incredible. So I highly recommend doing a few free tests to kind of gauge how gullible some of the people in your team might be to things like phishing. And I always tell my team, I don't care if you feel like an idiot, send it to me and ask if you're not sure, or send me a screenshot. I'm always happy to say, no, it's spam, just delete it. That's, it's never a silly question. I'd much rather they do that than take the chance and don't click on exe files. There's also obviously options to build bespoke applications and tools, whether that's to help your organisation or the people you help. We often spend a large majority of our time at CLCs dealing with a small group of issues in the same way over and over. These types of problems are ripe for solving with a blanket solution, but sometimes it's a resource that can be tricky. Some good examples, though, are Moonee Valley Legal Services Fine Fixer app. They just had a whole large cohort of their clients that were dealing with fines, and so they developed in concert with one of the university programs a website where people can take themselves through sort of a choose your own adventure, if you will, of the different types of fines and how they could query it or approach it or appeal it, that sort of thing. We've also, at Consumer Action, we invested we built it's called a demand a refund, our website, and that's in relation to junk insurance. So, extended warranties and add-on insurance for cars for people that don't have, that are on Centrelink, things that just really shouldn't be sold, and ways for them to be demanding the premiums they paid back. And we've actually had more than $1 million claimed back by just average people using the website, and that's really quite an impact. Almost every state has university programs that are ready and willing to help you build what you need. So make sure you sort of check those out. And sometimes pro bono partners might help, or you find some project funding via a grant program. Now, how on earth can I keep up to date on what all new tools are available? Well, it's constantly changing, keeping an eye on media. You've got Microsoft and Apple provide updates all the time, so obviously stay abreast of those, particularly when it comes to security updates. there's usually newsletters for things like Office 365 updates, G Suite updates, OpenOffice, if anyone's using that. There's plenty of non-profit IT nerd groups. I happened to come across a group called, affectionately called the NFP Geeks, and so it's a bunch of people that at varying levels. Some of us are really quite new to it. Some of us are very advanced, but everyone has something to add and good questions to ask. And it's just we have an email chain letter that goes around, you can ask the group whatever questions you want and get some answers. There's a meeting once a month. Not everyone makes it every time, but it's been really instrumental for me. A couple other options they suggested, actually, when I put the word out to them as how to get the best news. Spiceworks Forum, ForSysOps, there's a website called Ultimate Windows Security and itnews.com.au. There's also Better Cloud, have a newsletter that's quite good. It's more of a digest, but it's quite good. And finally, I think the main thing is just to create an adventurous culture. It's about getting people excited. It's about helping them realize that identifying problems is an opportunity to find a solution that can make things so much better. And, I guess the top takeaways are, try before you buy whenever possible. Have a discrete project, or see if a colleague or a stakeholder organization is using something that you're interested in and go and have a squeeze at it. Fail fast and often. What I mean by that is keep trying small things, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. You learn that that's not going to work, and you learned why that's not going to work, which will help inform you to make a better decision later. One was Skype chat came out and we're like, oh, well, maybe this will work for us. And so we deployed it within one particular team. About 2 months later, Microsoft announced Microsoft Teams. We had a look at that and realized, oh, it does so much more. This is the better solution. That doesn't mean that trying Skype chat was a bad decision. It was available at the time. We tried it. We found something better. Get some quick wins by targeting small things that are giant bugbears for a majority of people. For example, the cover sheet on the debit cards. Involve people by understanding every angle of the business practice you're trying to change. That means sitting with people for a while to figure out what it is that is going wrong for them and why. Then that's just what it takes. Ask them how it's impacting them, if they have suggestions or ideas. And make sure you find your lowest common denominator and your team champion, because you're going to need to test the capacity of anything you're hoping to roll out with both of those cohorts. Change management's really hard, so just do it as well as you possibly can. That adage that everyone wants change, but no one wants to change, and you're going to have to commit to the long haul with some things. Training, more training. Repeat yourself ad nauseum. I do it all the time, but it works. And there are some ways to automate that for yourself. It might be something as simple as getting someone to video you doing an induction speech that you do every time someone else starts. It might be getting a screen capture program on your computer so that you can do a quick instructional on how to do something with a particular program for new people. Review and revise everything. Set some mid and post-project or rollout review dates. Plan on revising some things, because not only will there be unintended consequences of any change, but the change itself may spark an evolution in thinking about other ways that you do things in your practice. And celebrate success. Don't be ashamed to nerd out. Just like pop culture memes, of which you'll see I've used many in this presentation, optimism and excitement are viral. It really, I can't over-egg that enough. Getting people on board and excited about the change and how it's going to, keep their, make their work better and keep them engaged with their work. It's just really critical. So that's that, basically. I'm more than happy to chat to anyone interested in finding out more about how and why. So please get in touch. I'll make sure that my contact details are in the handouts. And we might move back to some of these questions.
Thanks, Guy. That's awesome. I saw your presentation at the NACLAC conference last year and forgot how great it was. So I hope everyone out there really enjoyed that. There were some questions that came through, so I might just read them out so everyone can hear them, because they might be common to other people listening as well. So I think earlier when you sort of talked around your databases, there was a question that came through from Anne-Marie about how you're getting by regarding reporting to your funding bodies without using class. So do you have anything to say about that? I know it's a little bit outside the scope of this discussion perhaps, but something that's really on everyone's minds, obviously.
Sure. We negotiated out of Celsius years and years. Basically, when I first started, I realized that they had someone essentially spending 8 hours a week just double entering data from one system into the other, which is just a phenomenal waste of time. And so we negotiated with our state funder to not have to use Celsius. So that was sort of the bedrock of that. But it was on the proviso that at any time they could ask us for the same data that is required by Celsius and now class in the format that they need it in, and we'd have to respond to that within 2 business days. That has worked absolutely fine, whether it was with Celsius or with class. What it does mean is that obviously any time that there is a change to the National Data Standards Manual, we implement that in our own client management software here as well, so that we're mirroring what is required. The downfall is that we also are aware that the Attorney General's Department and other parliamentary departments often access some of that data from the back end in the way that they can, get the reports they need. So perhaps our story and our client, the people we help, the stories of their struggles don't necessarily make it through, and that's why for us our communications team is really critical, and doing a lot of impact reporting and things like that is really important. I hope that answers the question.
That's great, Sky, thank you. So did you develop your own CRM, or did you buy an off-the-shelf product to replace?
No, it was an off-the-shelf, but it's heavily customizable. So it's FileMaker Pro. However, as mentioned, in its current format, it's really not up to the challenge. And so we are in the process. We literally sent out the brief or the invitation to tender a product on Friday. So looking forward to that. It's going to be a very expensive and arduous exercise.
Totally. So good luck with that. I've got another question that's come through from Claire. So just asking whether you use the electronic system for advices or just casework.
No, it's used for advices. So basically what happens is whether it's a financial counsellor or a lawyer, when they pick up the phone and start listening to the person's issue, they'll be opening up FileMaker, they'll be entering that data in themselves. So they'll be capturing the demographic data themselves. They're capturing, obviously things that make practice easy, like contact details, and in our case, because it's consumer law, the relevant other parties. So it might be a trader or a business, whatever it might be. And then making file note, so taking down some notes of the client's story, and also providing a summary of the advice they provide to the client. The vast majority of interactions that start that way, because we run a triage model, it's basically a sort of 10 to 15 minute conversation, and all of that data capture and the advice giving, and the story gathering and the advice giving generally happens in that session. If, however, it's identified that, this might be a bit more to this story, or we need to see documents or something like that, the client's scheduled for a callback, at which point the caseworker then will gather more information, usually again within the file note keeping function of FileMaker Pro. But beyond that, if it turns into an actual litigation file where we're sending a retainer letter and things like that, that's when it becomes electronic documents mostly.
Great. So that looks like all the questions that have come through. Last chance for questions, guys. If you wanted to ask Sky while she's around, send that through now just via the question box, or you can put your hand up if you've got a microphone and we can unmute you and have a chat to you over the microphone. Also, while you're doing that, I was madly writing notes about a whole bunch of different other platforms and software that I want to try, and I'm so interested in the NFP Geeks, the free e-learning tools, and maybe setting up some sort of tech support resource through Yammer, which is what you guys have done and sounds really great. The Power BI data analytics also sounds awesome, and I think we're going to have a little play with that because we're very heavily involved in data at the moment. There have been just a couple of last-minute questions coming through, Sky, so thanks for sticking around, and thanks for sticking around to our audience as well. We're just a little over time today, but I think it's worth it. So Claire's asked, Claire, can you please share the info regarding SharePoint that you mentioned earlier? So hopefully I think Sky
Absolutely.
Can to do that. Great.
Perhaps if you could send me, if Claire doesn't mind, send me the direct email, because it'll be a link to some documents.
Beautiful. All right, that is awesome. Thank you, everyone, and thank you on behalf of everyone watching at their desks, and hopefully also madly writing down a whole bunch of notes for themselves to check out later. Sky, thank you for presenting today and for sharing all of the knowledge that you've gained throughout the years you've been at Consumer Action, and for offering to share some of those resources with us as well. Hopefully this will mean that many of our CLCs won't be so scared of technology and will take that dive in, certainly, obviously, after they've put a bit of a strategy and change management plan in place in their organisation.
Yeah.
So
I guess one thing I didn't mention is that I did not study IT. I came from very much a community development administration background. There's an element of just don't be scared, just jump in. Like, it's really not that scary. I can't emphasize that enough.
And on that note, I think we'll finish up today. So as I mentioned, I'll send the recording and the detailed notes from Sky's presentation out this afternoon. And please make sure you do provide some feedback on today's webinar for us to review. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.